Good morning. How's everyone today? So my name is Brett Goulder, and I'm a product manager at Heroku. I've been working at Heroku for about 5 years now. And before that, I was, like many of you, I was actually a software engineer and also a Heroku customer, and have used it quite successfully in my past couple software companies. Nowadays, I look after products for both the common runtime as well as private spaces, which we're going to be talking about in more detail today. Also up with me on stage is Scott Klassen, who is our lead architect, and he'll be helping out with our Q&A at the end. Before we jump into things, as you might have seen in some other presentations, some of what we are talking about today reflects our plans for the future, and you should only be making purchasing decisions based on what's currently shipping. So just a show of hands, how many of you have pushed an app up to Heroku in the last 6 months? Okay, it looks like a few of you. But for folks who haven't, I just want to do a super quick overview of what is Heroku. So Heroku is a cloud platform that lets companies build, deliver, monitor, and scale apps. We're the fastest way to go from idea to URL, bypassing all those infrastructure headaches. So without Heroku, before you even get an application off the ground, you have to make all sorts of decisions about like how you're going to containerize your app, what operating system you're going to use. You have to monitor that application, throw a load balancer in front of that application, and you have to do that every single time you create a new app. With Heroku, it makes it really easy. All you have to do is deploy, manage, and scale, and Heroku will take care of the rest. And we have amazing language support. We have 6 official languages, all backed by language owners. But you're not limited to those languages. You can actually use whatever language that you want. We'll run it. Heroku is built for developers so they can stay focused on building great apps. And that brings us to talk about private spaces. And the best way for me to introduce you all to private spaces is for me to demo it. So let's switch over to our demo. So inside my org, and my enterprise org here, for private spaces, we have this tab here, which lists all my spaces. I can create a new space. I'll say Intense Industries, Demo 5. And you can create the space in one of 6 regions. So you can better serve your global customers and reduce their network latency. I'm going to choose Virginia because most of my customers are on the East Coast. And there we created a new space. This process generally takes about 8 minutes. Rather than wait around, I've actually have a space already set up for us. Inside my space, I have an app. And so if you've used Heroku before, this is pretty much a very similar experience. But the most important thing is that this is like your own private version of Heroku with a network isolation boundary around everything that's private to just your organization. With each private space, you can set up trusted IP ranges. So for instance, if you need to set up a private space to just respond to traffic from your corporate network, you can easily set that here. As well as every single private space has a set of outbound IPs. In case you need to whitelist your private space with any sort of protected API or Salesforce instances or RDS, anything like that. And also, with private spaces, you can actually peer with other AWS VPCs. This is really important. Again, if you run another data service on AWS, or you have existing infrastructure running there. And that's pretty much it. Like everything else is very similar to the entire Heroku developer experience. So why does this matter? And it comes down to trust and security. And it's trust and security that it's not just within your organization, but it's the trust and security that you're providing to your end customers. Hacking can completely devastate an organization. It can ruin all your customer trust and credibility. And it can take a long time to recover from, if you recover at all. It takes a lot of effort to securely set up and deploy an application. And Heroku Private Spaces makes this really easy. A lot goes into making a private space secure. So each private space has an AWS account that's dedicated to you. And every single private space has a new set of VPCs also dedicated to you, one for your app and then one for your data. And every single private space uses a multi-layer network, which consists of a DMZ, an outbound access network, and a private network to access your data and other resources within your space. And all private spaces allow you to restrict traffic based on an IP address. And like the example I gave you earlier, if you want to restrict traffic to just your corporate network or from your CDN, you can easily do that. And every single private space has this set of static IPs for whitelisting traffic from your private space. So for any sort of protected API like Braintree, you can easily set this up. And all your data, if you're using Heroku Redis or Postgres or Kafka, has its own dedicated VPC that is completely isolated from the public internet. So this is to help ensure that your data is safe and secure. And one other thing worth mentioning is Heroku Shield. You might have seen this on the Spaces creation page we were on before. So Heroku Shield is another flavor of private spaces where we take security even further, where we make things fully HIPAA compliant. So with Shield, you get dedicated logging governance, keystroke logging for all interactive sessions. Every single dyno has its own encrypted file system, and Postgres also has encryption enforcement. But most importantly with Shield is that for any apps that you create with it, we can sign a business associated agreement with. So if you're touching any sort of protected health information, or you're building an app that you need to handle protected health information, you can easily do so. And you can still have the Heroku developer experience along with that. Private Spaces is also a great place to run microservices. So as applications grow in sophistication and scale, developers nowadays are often looking to break their apps into smaller, more purpose-built microservices. Microservice architectures really help improve your overall reliability, as well as allows you, once you decouple these apps into these smaller pieces, you can make changes more efficiently. On the other end of the spectrum, like you imagine a large monolithic application, it can actually be really hard to make even the tiniest of changes. And so earlier we talked about private networking in the sense of how data is moving back and forth, but it's also a really important feature for microservices. So unlike dynos in the common runtime, if you use Heroku in the past, dynos inside private spaces can freely exchange TCP and UDP traffic. So any sort of dyno that's running inside a microservice or inside a private network can listen on a port, and other dynos can be able to connect to that port. And this makes these microservice setups extremely easy. But how do you get an IP address that you want to connect with? So with private spaces, you get built-in support for DNS-based service discovery. And with DNS service discovery, processes and systems have a way to reach one another. So let's say you have a web dyno, and it can take that web dyno can accept a back office job and then send that to another worker by its DNS name. It can then send that job, that worker can send that job to another worker by its DNS name as well. Like in this example up here, we have a process called auth, and that belongs to an app, internal API. And you can call that from any other app within the space. But it makes these microservice architectures really easy to set up on private spaces. So when you bring Heroku Private Spaces into your enterprise organization, you also get a full set of governance controls that actually comes with Heroku Enterprise. As a quick example, but one thing to note is that it still allows you to still have this Heroku developer experience. So as a quick example, let's jump back over to our dashboard. So inside my organization, inside my space, I've set up what's called a pipeline. So a pipeline is part of Heroku Flow, and this is a central part of the Heroku developer experience. A pipeline is a group of Heroku apps that all share the same code base. So you can see here in my staging pipeline, I have intense camping TDX staging as my app. And in my production pipeline, I have intense camping TDX prod. And these apps are actually linked together. So let's say if I wanted to I can promote changes between the two pipelines. And this pipeline is actually also set up and synced with my GitHub repository. So this is really cool because GitHub's become such a centralized piece for many developers. I'm sure everyone here is using GitHub. And any sort of changes that you merge back into master or any sort of pull requests, you can actually see happen inside your pipeline. So as an example, I want to show off what's called a review app. So let's pretend, like, as a product manager, my product manager says that they want to change this sign up now link to a button, as a quick example. One of my developers can easily go into the code and change the HTML here. I'll create a new branch. And we're going to create a new pull request. And as soon as I create that pull request, because this is synced, you can see it starts to build a review app. And so a review app is going to deploy momentarily. This process usually takes a few seconds. And we can actually see that it's creating the app right now. And it's building this app into a slug just based off the pull request that you just created. So now I can actually go and share this PR with my product manager and get final approval of it and say, look, we have our sign up now button. It's not a link anymore. Let's say I do get that approval. I can then go ahead and merge that pull request back in. And as soon as I do that, it tears down that review app. And I have this set up where, as part of Heroku Flow, you have CI integration built in. So a lot of Agile teams use CI to continuously test and deploy and ensure that your code is robust. It goes ahead and runs all my tests. And provided that this all passes, it's currently running. Hopefully we have everything's green. Okay, looks like once everything passes here, I have this set up to automatically deploy into my staging app. Okay, everything's passed. So hopefully, at this point, this will now move this build over to my staging pipeline. Okay, so now we're building our app again and going through the same process. So we're continuously testing and deploying and ensuring that our code that's going out into production is always going to be tested and robust and stable. And one thing to show off here is that every single application has its own set of access controls that you can set within your organization. So in this org, everyone's an admin, but for instance, I can set individual view, deploy, operate, or manage roles. So I can, for my production app, I can scope that down to a limited set of users that I would want touching my, my production app. But at the same time, I can give access to all of my developers to go deploy into staging beforehand. So this allows you to really maintain that control and governance over your production deploy. But at the same time, you still have that developer experience that everyone loves to use. So once we're happy with it, we can promote this over to production. And it deploys right away. And maybe, don't know what happened there. Might take a little while to deploy. But this is an example of how Heroku Flow all fits in together with your organization. So back to our PowerPoint. So Heroku really understands your development lifecycle. And Heroku Flow allows you to work from a source control, and it uses continuous integration into your development practice. And you can test and promote an app all the way from dev to staging to prod. So in summary today, Heroku is the fastest way to go from idea to URL. And Private Spaces will provide you trust and security. It's a great place to run microservice apps with dyno-to-dyno networking and DNS service discovery. And then once you combine it with Heroku pipelines, you get these continuous delivery best practices, but you still maintain that control over your production deployment where trust is at its utmost importance. That leaves some time for Q&A. So we have a microphone right here. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and Natalie will come find you.
Yes. Can you use private spaces for HIPAA-compliant apps, or do you have to use Shield? Do the dynos run on dedicated hardware, or are they shared hardware still?
So do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so is this on? So yeah, we require, if you need a BAA signed, you have to use a shield space. But you know, there's a few extra controls available that sort of make it possible for you to do HIPAA compliance that aren't on standard private spaces.
So basically, the security is because you're protecting the entire space, right? The access to the space. Within it, for example, if you're using Kafka and anything like that, the data address itself is not encrypted. I suppose it's just access to the whole space, if I understand correctly, that's protected?
In a standard space, the database plans don't, is that true? So with the shield space, for sure, all the database plans, or the Kafka plans, use encryption at rest.
Yep.
And not necessarily on the standard private space plans, but yes, there's a network boundary that isolates, you know, the rest of the world from your apps.
But the data at rest may not necessarily be encrypted, for example, especially if you're using Kafka and while waiting there, you know, that data may not be encrypted.
Yeah, and to be clear, the encryption is not some sort of fancy add-on to Postgres or Kafka. It's like EBS disk encryption, so it's pretty standard and transparent to the performance of the application.
Could you expand a little bit on the AWS connection thing? Why, do you have some use cases where I can connect my AWS user?
Sure. So if you have, say, you're running your own MongoDB or MySQL or something like that, and you have it in a VPC already, and you have a bunch of data there, you have some services, or you're running a service in a VPC in front of your own MySQL, and you want to write a bunch of Heroku apps that talk to either that database in the VPC or to services within that VPC, and you want to do that securely in a network isolated fashion, you could peer the two VPCs together, and then traffic from your dyno just flows over the peering connection, not out over the private internet or over the public internet to either those services or those databases within your own self-managed VPC.
So when you say it doesn't travel through the internet, that means you guys are running in AWS, or is it?
So you'd create a VPC in Amazon, right? That in your own account. Then there's tooling either through the dashboard or through the command line where you initiate the peering requests. Our automation picks up the peering request and establishes the connection and opens the correct security groups and whatnot to allow traffic to egress out of the Heroku managed VPC, and then of course you have to subsequently, have allowed into your VPC that same traffic from the peering connection.
Can you do the same thing with the Azure?
Not currently, but Brett is the product manager, so if you want that, you should tell him you want that.
Yep.
Yeah, we have a use case where we are planning to use Heroku and with our databases on Azure. So yeah, that's what
So you can, of course, use the static outbound IPs feature to give IP whitelist security. So again, it's not going to be a private network, but it's going to be, if you can restrict access via IP address, then you can get, some form of better security than just over the internet.
Thank you.
Are there any plans to have something like a Bastion host that can allow you to route traffic from the public internet to your private space?
Can you kind of explain more the use case there?
Yeah, so I'm asking about an automated Bastion that is secure, and the only thing that it does is routes traffic from the insecure internet to your private space, but you control it and you manage it through Heroku.
So I mean, the ingress we provide right now is through Heroku Router. So within the private space, each app has its own ELB, and so that is to some extent a bastion if you're talking about something more sophisticated where you can manage ports and/or raw TCP traffic, again, Brett is the man to talk to.
Thank you.
That's it?
Good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. Before you go, you can find out more information about private spaces at www.heroku.com/private-spaces. And on Trailhead, there's a couple modules. Just go search Heroku. And we have a couple other sessions on Heroku today. Exploring machine learning on Heroku at 11:15. We also have manipulating millions of Salesforce records using Heroku Connect and Postgres at 12. And then building Heroku and Force.com architectures to extend your Salesforce deployment at 2 p.m. Thanks everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.